Simon & Schuster Audio presents How to See Yourself as You Really Are by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Translated, edited, and read by Jeffrey Hopkins.
Forward by Jeffrey Hopkins. This audiobook by His Holiness the Dalai Lama stems from a basic Buddhist notion that love and insight work cooperatively to bring about enlightenment like the two wings of a bird. The overarching theme is that self-knowledge is the key to personal development and positive relationships. The Dalai Lama shows us how, in the absence of true self-knowledge, we hurt ourselves through misguided, exaggerated notions of self, others, external events, and physical things. Even our senses deceive us, drawing us into attachment and negative actions that can only come back to haunt us in the future. The audiobook details how to overcome these mistakes in order to live from a realistic knowledge of our healthy interdependence. The first part of this audio program shows how to draw back the deceptive aspect of our experience like a curtain. Other approaches, such as suppressing lust and hatred, may be helpful, but they do not address this root problem. By directing our attention to the false veneer that so bedazzles our senses and our thoughts, His Holiness sets the stage for discovering the reality behind appearances. Our tacit acceptance of things as they seem is called ignorance, which is not just a lack of knowledge about how people and things actually exist, but an active mistaking of their fundamental nature. True self-knowledge involves exposing and facing misconceptions about ourselves. The aim here is to find out how we get ourselves into trouble, then to learn how to intervene on the ground floor of our counterproductive ideas. Buddhist psychology is known for its detailed descriptions of the mind's workings, and His Holiness uses these insights in a practical way by helping listeners catch hold of these processes through their own experience. His central theme is that our skewed perceptions of body and mind lead to disastrous mistakes, ranging from lust at the one extreme to raging hatred at the other, with the result that we are consistently being led into trouble as if pulled by a ring in our nose. By developing insight into this process, we can free ourselves and those around us from these endless scenarios of pain. This part provides step-by-step exercises to develop our ability to recognize the disparity between how we appear to ourselves and how we actually are. Once we have recognized our warped assumptions for what they are, the second part of this audiobook shows how to undermine them. The tools used to accomplish this transformation are renowned Buddhist reflections for questioning appearances, which the Dalai Lama illustrates with his own experiences. His Holiness guides listeners through a variety of practical exercises to help break down the illusions we have superimposed over and beyond what actually exists, and to learn how to act in the world from a more realistic framework. This calls for valuing the interdependence of all things and appreciating the lattice work of our relationships for the meaningful contribution it makes to our lives. The audiobook's third part describes how to harness the power of meditative concentration with insight to achieve immersion in our own ultimate nature, which undermines our problems at their very foundation. The fourth and fifth parts discuss how people and things actually do exist, since they do not exist in the way we assume. The Dalai Lama draws listeners into noticing how everything depends on thought, how thought itself organizes what we perceive. His goal is to develop in us a clear sense of what it means to exist without misconception. Then the final part of the program explains the way this profound state of being enhances love by revealing how unnecessary destructive emotions and suffering actually are. In this way, self-knowledge is seen as the key to personal development and positive relationships. Once we know how to put insight in the service of love and love in the service of insight, we come to the audiobook's appendix, an overview of the steps for achieving altruistic enlightenment. This program itself is an illustration of Tibet's contribution to world culture, reminding us of the importance of maintaining a homeland for its preservation. The light shining through the Dalai Lama's teachings has its source in that culture, offering insights and practices that so many of us need in ours. Jeffrey Hopkins, Ph.D., Emeritus Professor of Tibetan Studies, University of Virginia. Part 1. The Need for Insight. Introduction. My perspective. When we rise in the morning and listen to the news or read the newspaper, we're confronted with the same sad stories: violence, wars, and disasters. It is clear that even in modern times, precious life is not safe. I cannot recall a single daily news program without a report of crime somewhere. There is so much bad news nowadays, such an awareness of fear and tension, that any sensitive and compassionate being must question the so-called progress we have made in our modern world. Ironically, the most serious problems emanate from industrially advanced societies, where unprecedented literacy only seems to have fostered restlessness and discontent. There is no doubt about our collective progress in many areas, especially science and technology. But somehow our advances in knowledge are not sufficient. Basic human problems remain. We have not succeeded in bringing about peace or in reducing overall suffering. This situation brings me to the conclusion that there may be something seriously wrong with the way we conduct our affairs, which, if not checked in time, could have disastrous consequences for the future of humanity. Science and technology have contributed immensely to the overall development of humankind, to our material comfort and well-being, as well as to our understanding of the world we live in. But if we put too much emphasis on these endeavors, we are in danger of losing those aspects of human knowledge that contribute to the development of an honest and altruistic personality. Science and technology cannot replace the age-old spiritual values that have been largely responsible for the true progress of world civilization as we know it today. No one can deny the material benefits of modern life, but we are still faced with suffering, fear, and tension, perhaps more now than ever before. So it is only sensible to try to strike a balance between material development on the one side and development of spiritual values on the other. in order to bring about a great change, we need to revive and strengthen our inner values. I hope that you share my concern about the present worldwide moral crisis, and that you will join me in calling on all humanitarians and religious practitioners who share this concern to contribute to making our societies more compassionate, just, and equitable. I say this not as a Buddhist or even as a Tibetan, but simply as a human being. I also do not speak as an expert on international politics, though I unavoidably comment on these matters, but as a part of the Buddhist tradition, which, like the traditions of other great world religions, is founded on the bedrock of concern for all beings. From this perspective, I share with you the following personal beliefs. 1. Universal concern is essential to solving global problems. 2. That love and compassion are the pillars of world peace. 3. That all world religions seek to advance world peace, as do all humanitarians, no matter what their ideology is. 4. That each individual has a responsibility to shape institutions to serve the needs of the world. Let us consider these one by one. First, universal concern is essential to solving global problems. Of the many problems we face today, some are natural calamities that must be accepted and faced with equanimity. Others, however, are of our own making, created by misunderstanding, and these can be corrected. One such problem arises from the conflict of ideologies, political or religious, when people fight one another over their beliefs, losing sight of the basic humanity binding us together as a single human family. We must remember that these different religions, ideologies, and political systems of the world all arose to help living beings achieve happiness. We must not lose sight of this fundamental goal. At no time should we place means above ends. We must always maintain the supremacy of compassion over ideology. By far, the greatest single danger facing all living beings on our planet is the threat of nuclear destruction. I need not elaborate on this danger, but I would like to appeal to the leaders of the nuclear powers who literally hold the future of the world in their hands, to the scientists and technicians who continue to create these awesome weapons of destruction, and to all people at large to exercise sanity and to disarm. We know that in the event of a nuclear war, there will be no victors, because there will be no survivors. Is it not frightening just to contemplate such inhuman and heartless destruction? And is it not logical that we should remove the potential cause for our own destruction once we recognize it? Often, we cannot overcome a problem because we do not know its cause, or, if we understand it, we do not have the means or the time to remove it. This is not the case with the nuclear threat. Whether they belong to a more evolved species, such as humans, or to simpler ones, such as animals, all beings seek peace, comfort, and security. Life is as dear to the mute animal as it is to any human being. Even the simplest insect strives for protection from dangers that threaten its life. Just as each one of us wants to live and does not wish to die, so it is with all other creatures, though their power to effect this varies. Broadly speaking, there are two types of happiness and suffering, mental and physical. Since I believe that mental suffering and happiness are more influential than their physical counterparts, I usually stress training the mind as a strategy to manage suffering and attain a more lasting state of happiness. Happiness is a combination of inner peace, economic viability, and above all, world peace. To achieve such goals, I feel it is necessary to develop a sense of universal responsibility, a deep concern for all, irrespective of creed, color, sex, nationality, or ethnicity. The premise behind universal responsibility is the simple fact that we all want the same thing. Every being wants happiness and does not want suffering. If we do not respect this fact, there will be more and more suffering on this planet. If we adopt a self-centered approach to life and constantly try to use others for our own self-interest, we may gain temporary benefits, but in the long run, both personal happiness and world peace will be completely out of the question. In their quest for happiness, humans have used different methods, and all too often these means have been aggressive and harsh, behaving in ways utterly unbecoming to humanity. People commit terrible cruelties, inflicting suffering upon other living beings for the sake of selfish gains. In the end, such short-sighted actions bring nothing but suffering to ourselves and to others. Being born a human being is a rare event in itself, and it is wise to use this opportunity as beneficially as possible. We must keep in mind that we all want the same thing, so that one person or group does not seek happiness or glory at the expense of others. All this calls for a compassionate approach to global problems. Globalization means that the world is rapidly becoming smaller and more interdependent because of technology and international trade. As a result, we need one another more than ever before. In ancient times, problems were mostly family size, so they could be addressed at the family level. But that situation has changed. Today, one nation's problems can no longer be satisfactorily resolved by itself alone. Too much depends on the interests, attitudes, and cooperation of other nations. A universal approach to world problems is the only sound basis for world peace. We are so closely interconnected that without a sense of universal responsibility and understanding that we really are part of one big human family, we cannot hope to overcome the dangers to our very existence, let alone bring about peace and happiness. What does this entail? Once we recognize that all beings cherish happiness and do not want suffering, it becomes both morally wrong and pragmatically unwise to pursue our own happiness, oblivious to the feelings and aspirations of all other members of our own human family. Considering others when pursuing our own happiness leads to what I call wise self-interest, which hopefully will transform itself into compromised self-interest, or better still, mutual interest. Some people think that cultivating compassion is good for others, but not necessarily for themselves. But this is wrong. You are the one who benefits most directly, since compassion immediately instills in you a sense of calm, inner strength, and a deep confidence and satisfaction, whereas it is not certain that the object of your compassion will benefit. Love and compassion open our own inner life, reducing stress, distrust, and loneliness. I quite agree with a Western doctor who recently told me that those people who often use the words I, my, and me are at greater risk of having a heart attack when, because of self-centeredness, your view is narrowed to yourself. Even a small problem will seem unbearable. Although increasing interdependence among nations might be expected to generate more cooperation, it is difficult to achieve a spirit of genuine cooperation as long as people remain indifferent to the feelings and happiness of others. When people are motivated mostly by greed and jealousy, it is not possible for them to live in harmony. A spiritual approach may not provide an overnight solution to all the political problems caused by our present self-centered approach, but in the long run, it will address the very basis of the problems that we face today, removing them at their root. The world is becoming smaller now to the degree that all parts of the world are obviously parts of yourself. Thus, destruction of your enemy is destruction of yourself. The very concept of war is outdated. If the 20th century was the century of bloodshed, the 21st has to be the century of dialogue. If humankind continues to approach its problems from the perspective of temporary expediency, future generations will face tremendous difficulties. Global population is increasing, and our resources are being rapidly depleted. Consider the ruinous effects of massive deforestation on the climate, the soil, and global ecology as a whole. We are facing calamity because, guided by expediency and selfish interests, and not thinking of the entire family of living beings, we are not taking into account the earth and the long-term needs of life itself. If we do not think about these issues now, future generations may not be able to cope with them. Second, love and compassion as the pillars of world peace. According to Buddhist psychology, most of our troubles stem from attachment to things that we mistakenly see as permanent. Operating from that misconception, we see aggression and competitiveness as helpful in the pursuit of what we imagine and desire, but this only foments belligerence. Such misguided thinking has always been going on in the human mind, but our ability to act on it has become greater now that we have machines and techniques of enormous power to gather and consume resources. In this way, greed and aggression, spurred on by our ignorance of things as they really are, release more of their poison into the world. If problems are resolved in a humane way, they simply end. Whereas if one tries inhumane ways, further problems are added to the previous ones. The humane antidote to these problems is love and compassion, which are the essential ingredients of world peace. We are social animals. The main factors keeping us together are love and compassion. When you have love and compassion for a very poor person, your feelings are based on altruism. By contrast, love toward your husband, wife, children, or a close friend is often mixed with attachment. And when your attachment changes, your kindness may disappear. Complete love is based not on attachment, but on altruism, which is the most effective response to suffering. Love and compassion are what we must strive to cultivate in ourselves, extending their present boundaries all the way to limitlessness. Undiscriminating, spontaneous, unlimited love and compassion are possible even towards someone who has done harm to you, your enemy. And the power of love and compassion is astonishing. Buddhism teaches us to view all sentient beings as our dear mothers and to show our gratitude to our mothers by loving all sentient beings. One of the first actions we took in life was to suck milk from our mother's nipple, mother's milk being the very symbol of love and compassion. Scientists have documented through research on monkeys that offspring who are separated from their mothers for a prolonged period are more tense and harsh, lacking the capacity to express friendliness to others. Whereas those brought up with their mothers are more playful, which implies happiness. According to the Buddhist outlook, we are born and reborn countless numbers of times, which means it is conceivable that each sentient being has been our parent at one time or another. In this way, all beings share family ties. From the moment of our birth, we are under the care and kindness of our parents. Later in life, when we face the suffering of disease and old age, we are again dependent on the kindness of others. If at the beginning and end of our lives, we depend upon the kindness of others, why in the middle of our lives should we not act kindly toward them? It is the pragmatic choice. Developing a kind heart, a feeling of closeness for all beings, does not require following a conventional religious practice. It is not only for those who believe in religion, it is for everyone, regardless of race, religion, or political affiliation. It is for all who consider themselves to be, above all, members of the human family, who can embrace this larger and longer perspective. The basic values of love and compassion are present in us from the time of our birth, whereas racial, ethnic, political, and theological perspectives come later. Violence does not accord with our basic human nature, which may lead you to wonder why all sorts of violence become news, but compassionate acts seldom do. The reason is that violence is shocking and not in conformity with our basic human nature, whereas we take compassionate acts for granted because they are closer to our nature. Since we all wish to gain happiness and avoid suffering, and since a single person is relatively unimportant in relation to countless others, we can see that it is worthwhile to share our possessions with others. Happiness that is a byproduct of loving and serving others is far superior to what we gain from serving only ourselves. Our lives are in constant flux, which generates many predicaments. But when these are faced with a calm and clear mind, supported by spiritual practice, they can all be successfully resolved. When our minds are clouded by hatred, selfishness, jealousy, and anger, we not only lose control, but also our judgment. At those wild moments, anything can happen, including war. Although the practice of compassion and wisdom is useful to all of us, it is especially valuable for those responsible for running national affairs, in whose hands lie the power and opportunity to create a framework for world peace. Third, all world religions seek to advance world peace. The principles I have mentioned are in accordance with the ethical teachings of all world religions. I maintain that Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, Sikhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, hold up love as an ideal, seek to benefit humanity through spiritual practice, and strive to make its followers better people. All religions teach moral precepts for the advancement of mind, body, speech, and action. Do not lie or steal or take others' lives, and so on. Unselfishness is the common foundation laid down by all great spiritual teachers. This is the basis for leading their followers away from harmful deeds caused by ignorance and toward the path of goodness. All religions agree on the necessity to manage the undisciplined mind which harbors selfishness and other sources of trouble, and to point the way to a spiritual state that is peaceful, disciplined, ethical, and wise. In this sense, I believe all religions have essentially the same message. Of course, there is no end of argument when religious differences arise from dogma and cultural diversity. However, it is much better to implement in daily life the goodness taught by all religions rather than to argue about minor differences in approach. There are many religions seeking to bring comfort and happiness to humanity, just as there are many treatments for a particular disease. All religions endeavor to help living beings avoid misery and gain happiness. Although we may prefer one religious perspective to another, there is a much stronger case for unity stemming from common desires of the human heart. Each religion works to lessen suffering and contribute to the world. Conversion is not the point. I do not think about converting others to Buddhism or merely furthering the Buddhist cause. Instead, I try to think of how I, as a Buddhist, can contribute to the happiness of all living beings. While I point out the fundamental parallels between various world religions, I do not advocate a new world religion. All the different religions of the world are needed to enrich human experience and world civilization. Our human minds, with all their variety, need different approaches to peace and happiness. It is just like varieties of food. Certain people find Christianity more appealing. Others prefer Buddhism because it does not advocate a creator. Everything depends upon your own actions. We could make similar cases for other religions as well. The point is clear. Humanity needs all the world's religions to suit various ways of life, diverse spiritual needs, and inherited national traditions. It is from this perspective that I welcome efforts being made in various parts of the world for better understanding among different religions. The need for this is particularly urgent. If all religions make the betterment of humanity their main concern, they can work together for world peace. Ecumenical understanding will bring about the cohesion necessary for all religions to work together. Although this is an important step, we must remember that there are no quick or easy ways to navigate the doctrinal differences among various faiths. Nor can we hope to come up with a new, universal belief that satisfies everyone. Each religion makes its own distinctive contributions, and each in its own way is suited to the orientation of a particular group of people. The world needs them all. There are two primary tasks for religious practitioners concerned with world peace. First, we must promote better interfaith understanding to create a workable degree of unity among all religions, which we can achieve in part by respecting each other's beliefs and by emphasizing our common concern for human well-being. Second, we must bring about a viable consensus on basic spiritual values that touch every human heart. These two steps will enable us to act both individually and in concert to create the spiritual conditions necessary for world peace. Despite systematic attempts to replace spiritual values with political ideology and commercialism, the vast majority of humanity continues to believe in one religion or another. The tenacity of faith, even in the face of repressive political regimes, clearly demonstrates the potency of religion. This spiritual energy is power that can be harnessed to bring about world peace. Religious leaders and humanitarians all over the world have a special role to play in this respect. Whether we will be able to achieve world peace or not, we have no choice but to work toward that goal. If we allow love and compassion to be dominated by anger, we will sacrifice the best part of our human intelligence, wisdom, our ability to decide between right and wrong. Along with selfishness, anger is one of the most serious problems facing the world today. Fourth, each individual has a responsibility to shape institutions. Anger plays a large role in current conflicts, such as those in the Middle East and Asia, as well as those between highly industrialized nations and economically undeveloped nations, and so forth. These conflicts arise from a failure to understand how much we have in common. Answers cannot be found in the development and use of greater military force, nor are they purely political or technological. The problems we face today cannot be blamed upon one person or cause, but are the symptoms of our past negligence. What is required is an emphasis on what we share, which is basically a spiritual approach. Hatred and fighting cannot bring happiness to anyone, even to the winners of battles. Violence always produces misery, so it is essentially counterproductive. It is time for world leaders to learn to transcend differences of race, culture, and ideology in order to regard one another with appreciation of our common human situation. To do so would uplift individuals, communities, nations, and the world at large. Mass media, including the internet, can make a considerable contribution here by giving greater coverage to human interest items that reflect the ultimate oneness of humanity. International organizations, to a large extent, are ignoring their humanitarian responsibilities. I hope that all international organizations, especially the United Nations, will be more active and effective in serving humanity and promoting international understanding. It will indeed be tragic if a few powerful members misuse world bodies, such as the UN, for their one-sided interests. The UN must become the chief instrument of world peace. It is the only source of hope for small, oppressed nations, and hence for the planet as a whole. Within each nation, the individual ought to be given the right to achieve happiness, and among nations there must be equal concern for the welfare of even the weakest nations. I am not suggesting that one system is better than another and that all should adopt it. On the contrary, a variety of political systems and ideologies is desirable given the diverse dispositions within the human community. This variety enhances our prospects for happiness. Therefore, each national community should be free to evolve its own political and socioeconomic system based on the principle of self-determination. By the same token, because all nations are more economically dependent upon one another than ever before, human understanding must go beyond national boundaries to embrace the international community at large. Indeed, unless we can create an atmosphere of genuine cooperation in which threatened or actual use of force is replaced by heartfelt understanding, world problems will only increase. Not only is the gap between rich and poor morally wrong, but as a practical matter, it is a source of problems. If people in poorer countries are denied the happiness they desire and deserve, they will be dissatisfied and pose problems for the rich. If unwanted social, political, and cultural restrictions continue to be imposed upon unwilling people, the prospects for world peace grow dim. However, if we satisfy people at a heart-to-heart level, peace will surely ensue. I realize the enormity of the task before us, but I see no alternative other than the one I am proposing, which is based on our common humanity. Nations have no choice but to be concerned about the welfare of others, not only because of the shared aspirations of all humanity, but also because it is in the mutual and long-term interest of all concerned. We must also consider human benefit in the long run rather than just the short term. In the past, attempts have been made to create more just and equal societies. Institutions have been established with noble charters to combat antisocial forces. Unfortunately, such efforts have been undermined by selfishness and greed. Today we bear witness to the way ethics and noble principles are obscured by self-interest, particularly in the political sphere. Politics devoid of ethics does not further human welfare, and life without morality reduces humans to the level of beasts. This leads some of us to refrain from politics altogether. But politics is not axiomatically dirty. Rather, the misguided instruments of our political culture have distorted our high ideals and noble aspirations. Morality, compassion, decency, and wisdom are the building blocks of all civilizations. These qualities must be cultivated in childhood and sustained through systematic moral education in a supportive social environment so that a more humane world may emerge. We cannot wait for the next generation to make this change. We ourselves must attempt a renewal of basic human values. Hope lies in future generations, but not unless we institute major change on a worldwide scale in our educational systems now. We need a revolution in commitment to universal values. It is not enough to make noisy calls to halt moral degeneration. We must do something about it. Since present-day governments do not shoulder such responsibilities, humanitarians and religious leaders must strengthen existing civic, social, cultural, educational, and religious organizations to revive human and spiritual values. Where necessary, we must create new organizations to achieve these goals. Only in so doing can we hope to create a more stable basis for world peace. The seed of love and compassion is there in us intrinsically, but promoting and nurturing it have to be done through insight and education. To solve the problems humanity is facing, we need to organize meetings of scholars, educators, social workers, neuroscientists, physicians, and experts from all fields to discuss the positive and negative sides of what we have done thus far, as well as what needs to be introduced and what needs to be changed in our educational system. Proper environment plays a crucial role in the healthy growth of a child. All problems, including terrorism, can be overcome through education, particularly by introducing concern for all others at the preschool level. Living in society, we must share the suffering of our fellow citizens and practice compassion and tolerance, not only toward our loved ones, but also toward our enemies. This is the test of our moral strength. We must set an example by our own practice. We must live by the same high standards of integrity we seek to convey to others. The ultimate purpose is to serve and benefit the world. My intention in this audiobook is to make a contribution, however small, to world peace by explaining Buddhist notions about finding the source of hurtful emotions, such as lust and hatred, within ourselves, and then describing Buddhist practices to undermine these painful influences and supplant them in the heart with insight and love. Part 1. The Need for Insight. Chapter 1. Laying the Ground for Insight to Grow. When starting to practice, be eager, like a deer trapped in a pen, seeking to get out. In the middle, be like a farmer during harvest, not waiting for anything. In the end, be like a shepherd who has brought the flock home. From Bajol Rinpoche's Sacred Word. What makes all this trouble in the world? Our own counterproductive emotions. Once they are generated, they harm us both superficially and deeply. These afflictive emotions accomplish nothing but trouble from beginning to end. If we tried to counteract each and every afflictive emotion individually, we would find ourselves in an endless struggle. So what is the root cause of afflictive emotions that we can address more fruitfully? In the many scriptures of the Buddha, we find descriptions of practices to counter lust, such as meditating on what lies beneath the skin: flesh, bone, organs, blood, solid waste, and urine. These reflections do indeed temporarily suppress lust, but they do not accomplish the same for hatred. And the reverse is also true. Those practices taught for the sake of undermining hatred, such as cultivating love, do not act as cures for lust. Like medicines used to counteract a specific illness, they do not treat other illnesses. However, because all counterproductive emotions are based on ignorance of the true nature of things, practices that teach us how to overcome that ignorance undercut all afflictive emotions. The antidote to ignorance addresses all troubles. This is the extraordinary gift of insight. As preparation for developing insight into how you, other persons, and things actually exist, it is crucial to study spiritual teachings closely. thinking about them again and again. This is important because in order to generate a state that allows us to penetrate clear through to reality, we must first correct our mistaken ideas about existence. Identifying ignorance. To succeed at developing insight, first you need to identify ignorance. Ignorance in this context is not just a lack of knowledge, it is an active misapprehension of the nature of things. It mistakenly assumes that people and things exist in and of themselves by way of their own nature. This is not an easy concept to grasp, but it is very important to identify this faulty perception, for it is the source of destructive emotions such as lust and hatred. In Buddhism, we repeatedly speak of emptiness, but if you do not see how people mistakenly attribute to things their own inherent existence, it is impossible to understand emptiness. You have to recognize, at least in a rough way, what you are falsely superimposing on phenomena before you can understand the emptiness that exists in its stead. Understanding how you actually exist, who you really are, without the overlay of false imagination, is the main topic of this audio book. All of the Buddha's many teachings are aimed at attaining liberation from cyclic existence, with its endless movement from one life to another, and achieving omniscience. Ignorance is the root of everything that stands in the way of these attainments. Ignorance binds us to suffering. Therefore, ignorance has to be clearly identified. To do so, we must consider how this false quality of inherent existence appears to the mind, how the mind assents to it, and how the mind bases so many ideas on this fundamental mistake. Ignorance is not just other than knowledge. It is the contradiction of knowledge. Scientists tell us that the more closely we examine things, the more likely we are to find empty space. Ignorance, by relying on appearances, superimposes onto persons and things a sense of concreteness that, in fact, is not there. Ignorance would have us believe that these phenomena exist in some fundamental way. Through ignorance, what we see around us seems to exist independently, without depending on other factors for its existence. But this is not the case. By giving people and things around us this exaggerated status, we are drawn into all sorts of overblown and ultimately hurtful emotions. Identifying this false appearance of things and acknowledging our tacit assent to this illusion are the first steps toward realizing that you and other beings, as well as all other objects, do not exist the way they appear to. They do not exist so concretely and autonomously. In the process of developing an accurate assessment of who you actually are, you need to appreciate the disparity between how you appear to your own mind and how you indeed exist. The same holds true for other people and all other phenomena of the world. Meditative reflection. Consider: 1. All counterproductive emotions are based on and depend upon ignorance of the true nature of persons and things. 2. There are specific ways to suppress lust and hatred temporarily, but if we undermine the ignorance that misconceives the nature of ourselves, others, and all things, all destructive emotions are undermined. 3. Ignorance sees phenomena which actually do not exist in and of themselves as existing independent of thought. Chapter 2. Discovering the source of problems. Attracted by light and heat, a moth flies into a flame. Stunned by the sounds of a guitar, a deer stands unaware of a hunter. Drawn by the scent of a flower, a bug is trapped inside. Attached to taste, a fish rushes to a hook. Pulled to mud, an elephant cannot escape. From Bachol Rinpoche's Sacred Word. Our senses contribute to our ignorance, to our faculties of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. Objects seem to exist in their own right. Presented with this information, the mind assents to this exaggerated status of things. Buddhists call such a mind ignorant for accepting this false appearance instead of resisting it. The ignorant mind does not question appearances to determine if they are correct. It merely accepts that things are as they appear. Next, we become committed to the seeming truth of the concreteness of objects, thinking, if this is not true, what could possibly be true? As we do so, our ignorant misapprehension gets stronger. For instance, when we first encounter something or someone nice, we briefly take notice of the object of our attention, merely recognizing its presence. The mind at this point is pretty much neutral. But when circumstances cause us to pay more attention to the object, it appears to be attractive in a way that is integral to the object. When the mind adheres to the object this way, thinking that it exists in the way it appears, lust for the object and hatred for what interferes with getting it can set in. When our own self is involved, we emphasize that connection. Now it is my body, my stuff, my friends, or my car. We exaggerate the object's attractiveness, obscuring its faults and disadvantages, and become attached to it as helpful in acquiring pleasure, whereby we are forcibly led into lust, as if by a ring in our nose. We might also exaggerate the object's unattractiveness, making something minor into a big defect, ignoring its better qualities. And now we view the object as interfering with our pleasure, being led into hatred, again, as if by a ring in our nose. Even if the object does not seem to be either agreeable or disagreeable, but just an ordinary thing in the middle, ignorance continues to prevail, although in this case it does not generate desire and hatred. As the Indian scholar yogi Nagarjuna says in his 60 stanzas of reasoning, how could great poisonous afflictive emotions not arise in those whose minds are based on inherent existence? Even when an object is ordinary, their minds are grasped by the snake of destructive emotions. Cruder conceptions of I and mine evoke grosser destructive emotions, such as arrogance and belligerence, making trouble for yourself, your community, and even your nation. These misconceptions need to be identified by watching your own mind. As the Indian thinker and yogi Dharmakirti says in his exposition of Buddhist thinking, in one who exaggerates self, there is always adherence to I. Through that adherence, there is attachment to pleasure. Through attachment, disadvantages are obscured and advantages seen, whereby there is strong attachment. And objects that are mine are taken up as means of achieving pleasure. Hence, as long as there is attraction to self, so long do you revolve in cyclic existence. It is crucial to identify and recognize different thought processes. Some thoughts merely make us aware of an object, such as seeing a watch as just a watch, without any afflictive emotions, like lust. Other thoughts determine correctly that an object is good or bad, but still do not introduce any afflictive emotions. These thoughts just recognize good as good and bad as bad. However, when the idea that objects inherently exist takes hold, fundamental ignorance has been introduced. As the mistaken assumption of inherent existence becomes stronger, lust or hatred become involved. The turning point from mere awareness to misconception comes when ignorance exaggerates the status of the goodness or badness of the object, so that it comes to be seen as inherently good or bad, inherently attractive or unattractive, inherently beautiful or ugly. Ignorantly misjudging this false appearance to be fact opens the way for lust, hatred, and myriad other counterproductive emotions. These destructive emotions, in turn, lead to actions based on lust and hatred. These actions establish karmic predispositions in the mind that drive the process of cyclic existence from life to life. The root of cyclic existence. The process I just described is how we are ruined by our own ignorance and fixed to this round of suffering in life after life that we call cyclic existence. Some levels of mind which we normally identify as correct are actually exaggerations of the status of persons and things that create trouble for ourselves and others. Ignorance keeps us from seeing the truth, the fact that people and other phenomena obey the laws of cause and effect, but do not have essential being that is independent in and of themselves. You need to identify this process as well as you can, gradually developing greater and greater understanding of the sequence of events, beginning with dispassionate observation and culminating in counterproductive emotions and actions. Without ignorance, counterproductive emotions are impossible. They cannot occur. Ignorance is their support. This is why Nagarjuna's student, the Indian scholar yogi Aryadeva, says, just as the capacity to feel is present throughout the body, ignorance dwells in all afflictive emotions. Therefore, all afflictive emotions are overcome through overcoming ignorance. Meditative reflection. Consider: 1. Does the attractiveness of an object seem to be integral to it? 2. Does the attractiveness of an object obscure its faults and disadvantages? 3. Does exaggeration of the pleasantness of certain objects lead to lust? 4. Does exaggeration of the unpleasantness of certain objects lead to hatred? 5. Notice how you first perceive an object, then notice if the object is good or bad, then conclude that the object has its own independent basis for existing, then conclude that the object's goodness or badness exists inherently in the object, and then generate lust or hatred according to your previous judgment. Chapter 3. Why understanding the truth is needed. Much of our planning is like waiting to swim in a dry ravine. Many of our activities are like housekeeping in a dream. Delirious with fever, one does not recognize the fever. From Bhattacharya Rinpoche's Sacred Word. If you do not have insight into the way you yourself and all things actually are, you cannot recognize and get rid of the obstacles to liberation from cyclic existence, and even more important, the obstructions to helping others. Without insight, you cannot address any problem at its root or remove the seeds that might produce it in the future. To overcome the misconception that things and people exist as self-sufficient entities, independent of consciousness, it is essential to observe your own mind to discover how this mistake is being conceived and how other destructive emotions arise with such ignorance as their support. Given that lust, hatred, pride, jealousy, and anger stem from exaggerating the importance of qualities such as beauty and ugliness, it is crucial to understand how persons and things actually exist without exaggeration. The only way to gain this understanding is internal. You need to give up the false beliefs you are superimposing on the way things really are. There is no external means of removing lust and hatred. If you are pierced by a thorn, you can remove it forever with a needle. But to get rid of an internal attitude, you must see clearly the mistaken beliefs on which it is based. This calls for using reason to explore the true nature of phenomena and then concentrate on what has been understood. This is the path leading to liberation and omniscience. As Dharmakirti says, without losing belief in the object of an afflictive emotion, it cannot be abandoned. The abandonment of desire, hatred, and so forth, which are related to misperceiving advantages and disadvantages, is through not seeing those in objects, not through external ways. When you see that all troublesome emotions, and indeed all problems, arise from a basic misunderstanding, you will want to get rid of such ignorance. The means to accomplish this is to reflect on reasoning that reveals the superimposition of a belief in inherent existence to be totally unfounded, and then to concentrate on the emptiness of inherent existence through meditation. Chandrakirti, a follower of Nagarjuna and Aryavaseva, said, "Seeing with their minds that all afflictive emotions and effects arising from view oneself as inherently existent, knowing that the self is the object of this, yogis refute their own inherent existence. Aryadeva similarly says that realization of selflessness is the way to stop cyclic existence. When selflessness is seen in objects, the seed of cyclic existence is destroyed. When the roots of a tree are cut, all the branches, twigs, and leaves dry up. In the same way, all the problems of cyclic existence are undermined by removing the misunderstanding that is their cause. The supreme scholar practitioners of India, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, and Dharmakirti, understood that the truth cannot be realized without seeing that we superimpose on people and things a status of solidity and permanence that actually is not there. The emptiness of that false superimposition must be understood. And to do this, they analyzed phenomena through scripture and through reasoning.